My name is Sarah. I'm 29 years old, living and working in Dallas, Texas. The story I'm about to share with you is not a love story. It's the unmasking of a man who once held my hand and vowed forever, yet in reality was nothing more than a professional con artist. At that divorce hearing, I thought I was simply closing the door on an unhappy marriage. But when the attorney presented the first pieces of evidence, the entire courtroom seemed to stop breathing. Daniel Brooks, the husband who once made me believe in fairy tales, was not only cheating, but conspiring with another woman to steal my identity and drain millions of dollars from the trust fund my grandmother had left for me. I turned to look at him, the man who used to hold me every night, now sitting with his head bowed in a wrinkled dress shirt. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just betrayed in love, I had been hunted like prey. Have you ever trusted someone so completely, only to find out you were nothing but a pawn in their scheme? If you've ever felt that, leave a comment below. I want to hear your story. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you is how I turned the tables and made him pay right in the place he thought would be his final stage. I met Daniel on a sunny Friday afternoon at a furniture showroom where I had just finished a design project for a boutique hotel downtown. He walked in, wearing a crisp white shirt, a dark navy tie, carrying himself like someone used to expensive spaces. He said he was looking for a special gift for an important client and asked for my advice. We talked for nearly an hour over a strong espresso, and before leaving, Daniel handed me his card with a polite smile and an invitation. If you're not busy tonight, there's an art exhibition in Uptown. I think it matches your taste. From that chance meeting, everything felt too smooth. Daniel knew exactly what I liked: classic jazz, olive green, handmade soy candles from Oregon. He never forgot any detail I mentioned in passing. We started going out 3 times a week without fail. My friends called him the perfect man, and my mother finally breathed a sigh of relief that I had moved on from fleeting, directionless romances. 6 months later, Daniel proposed in the garden terrace of the Crescent Court Hotel, surrounded by hundreds of golden lights and the soft sound of piano under the setting Sunday. He knelt and offered me a vintage sapphire ring that he said once belonged to his grandmother in New England. In that moment, I believed I was stepping into a new chapter of my life. We married in the spring at the Grand Ballroom of the Hilton Dallas. Over 200 guests attended, family, friends, Daniel's important clients, even people from the design industry I had worked with. The reception was decorated in cream and mint green, with peonies and orchids shipped in from California, and a live band playing carefully chosen jazz classics. Everyone said we were meant for each other. Everyone thought I was the luckiest woman in that ballroom. And perhaps I believed that too. For a short while, I felt loved, cherished, and safe. But only weeks after returning from our honeymoon in Key West, everything began to change. Daniel stopped touching me. No more long morning hugs, no more holding hands while watching a movie. Even his eyes began to avoid mine. He blamed work stress, back-to-back meetings, last-minute client dinners. I remember one night, I came to bed wearing a new silk nightgown from a boutique he once praised. He glanced at me once, then turned to the wall and pretended to sleep. I lay there in silence, listening to the steady hum of the air conditioner, trying to reason with myself. Maybe he was tired, maybe he was worried about work, maybe he just needed time to adjust to marriage. I tried to ask him, more than once. But Daniel always had an answer ready. "I don't want you to feel like you're being used," he said, eyes never leaving his phone. "We should build a stronger foundation instead of rushing into fleeting passion." I nodded, though inside I felt hollow. Part of me wondered if I was asking for too much, but another part began to stay alert. I used to think real love meant patience, weathering quiet spells together. But gradually I realized the silence wasn't temporary. It had become a wall, cold and invisible, between two people under the same roof. Daniel started leaving earlier, coming home later, taking calls on the balcony. He no longer told me about his day, no longer cared if I had eaten or slept well. I became a shadow, present but disconnected. One afternoon, I suggested going with him to the finance conference he claimed was in Salt Lake City. Daniel froze for a second, then forced a laugh. Why would you go? Those conferences are dry. Just a bunch of old men droning about stocks. You'd be bored to death. I smiled faintly, but inside I felt the sting. He used to be thrilled when I joined him at anything. Now he didn't want me there at all. Then one evening I stumbled on something that made my heart sink. While tidying the room, I found a faint receipt in the pocket of his suit jacket from a jewelry store in Las Vegas. It read, "Sterling silver diamond necklace. Gift wrapped." The date was the previous week, the same time he claimed he was meeting clients in Austin. I stood frozen with that paper in my hand. Not because of the value of the gift, but because Daniel had never bought me a single piece of jewelry, not for my birthday, not for our anniversary. I tucked the receipt into a drawer and said nothing. But from that moment, I wasn't waiting for excuses. I was waiting for the truth. The days after that receipt, I lived in quiet tension. Every move, every word of Daniel's looked different now, calculated, detached. He was no longer the man who once held me after a nightmare. No longer the man who called me the softest light in a dark day. He had become the husband who came home late, eyes glued to his phone, who always had a reason to step out of the room when a call came, who guarded his work life like a locked vault. "Headed to Salt Lake City again this week?" I asked casually while setting dinner. Daniel nodded without looking up. "Yeah, big client, strategic deal. No way I can miss it." I placed the salad down, watching him. "I could send some meals to your office, healthy stuff I've been trying for catering. You could give me feedback." He looked up, startled, then smirked. "My office is strict. Outsiders can't come in, and eating out is easier." I pressed a little further. "At least I could call one of your coworkers. I'm trying to network new clients. Maybe they could help introduce me." He slammed his hand on the table. "I told you, my firm handles private finance. Client lists are confidential. Even coworkers don't share names. Stop making this hard." His words felt like a lock snapping shut, trapping me outside a door I thought was ours. Soon the gap between us was undeniable. He often stayed away overnight, blaming flights, meetings, delays. I counted. In 3 weeks, Daniel missed 8 nights at home. Sometimes he texted briefly, "Back tomorrow morning. Don't wait up." But I stayed awake, not to wait for affection, but to observe. I noticed the subtle changes. Shirts scented with unfamiliar perfume, phone always face down, computer passwords changed weekly. He no longer left his wallet in its usual spot, but locked it away. Every time I entered his office, even with just a cup of coffee, his eyes flickered with suspicion. The silence between us wasn't just absence, it was a mask slipping. I wasn't living with a husband. I was living beside a man playing the role of my husband. One Wednesday afternoon, after he left with a small suitcase, I opened his closet. Everything looked tidy, but 3 of his favorite suits were missing. The silk tie I had given him was gone. I opened his nightstand drawer. Empty. No watch, no spare wallet, no notebook. The unease inside me had hardened into instinct. I went online to check airline tickets, entering his name in the check-in section. No reservations to Salt Lake City. I tried his old email. Still nothing. That night, I called Kendra, Daniel's old friend who had been at our wedding. "Kendra, have you seen Daniel at work lately?" I asked, trying to sound calm. There was hesitation. "Sarah, I thought Daniel left Carson and Gold before Christmas." I gripped the phone tighter. "What did you say?" "I thought you knew. He quit last year. People said he went into private investments." I ended the call in silence, heart pounding like a clock ticking too loudly in the dark. Daniel lying about trips was one thing, but lying about even having a job, that was a wall I couldn't ignore. I began documenting everything. Every text, every receipt I found in his pockets, every late night excuse. I took photos, saved them in a locked folder. I stopped cooking dinners for him, stopped asking about his day. I pulled back from the role of a devoted wife and quietly stepped into the role of a woman searching for the truth. A week later, he came home after 3 days away. His clothes smelled of a different detergent, his suitcase still tagged from a flight out of Las Vegas. "Did you go to Las Vegas?" I asked directly. Daniel chuckled, slipping off his watch without meeting my eyes. "Just a layover. Plane switched routes." I poured myself a glass of red wine. "I think we need to talk." He forced a calm look, but I saw his hand tremble slightly as he pulled out his phone. "About what?" I met his gaze. "About the fact that you're living two lives." Daniel laughed loudly, as if I'd told a bad joke. "Sarah, you've been watching too many movies." I pressed my lips together, holding on his stare. "Then I hope your acting is good, because from now on, every move you make, someone will be watching." It wasn't a threat, it was a warning. From that moment, I had decided either I would expose who Daniel really was, or I would spend my life with a stranger, and I could not accept the second. That Saturday, though it rained lightly from dawn, I drove to West Village just to clear my head. I didn't plan to shop much, only to step away from the suffocating air of our house where every move of Daniel's kept me on edge. But as I paused at a perfume store, my eyes landed on a gift box wrapped in silver paper with a deep red ribbon. The fragrance drifting through the air was strikingly familiar, just like the scent clinging to his shirts. I walked closer and asked the shop assistant. The young woman smiled brightly and said it was a limited collection, only sold at a few upscale locations, especially in Las Vegas. My heart turned cold. I got home a little after 3 p.m. Daniel was napping on the sofa, TV remote still in his hand. I went quietly upstairs, opened the drawer of his desk, the place where he usually tossed receipts and scraps of notes. It wasn't that I wanted to invade his privacy, but sometimes instinct pushes you to do things you never thought you'd be capable of. I sifted through stacks of papers and envelopes. Then, tucked between old advertising magazines, I found a faint receipt. In the bottom right corner was the logo of a flower shop on Flamingo Road, Las Vegas. The receipt listed 1 bouquet of premium red roses, 1 handwritten card. The order date matched the day Daniel claimed he had to fly urgently to Salt Lake City because the client changed the schedule. I flipped the receipt over. On the back, in Daniel's familiar handwriting, was a scribbled phone number and the words, "See you this weekend, love you." I stood frozen, my chest tightening as if squeezed by an invisible hand. This was no longer our suspicion. It was undeniable proof. I didn't call that number right away. I didn't want to let raw anger cloud my judgment. Instead, I wrote everything down, took photos, and saved them in a private folder on my hard drive. By the time Daniel woke up, I had already cooked dinner and set 2 plates of pasta as if nothing had happened. He yawned, stretched, and sat down across from me like a man with nothing to hide. "I slept hard," he said, pulling out a chair. I poured wine, smiling lightly. "Tired from the trip?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah, those clients kept changing schedules, had me running around." I broke off a piece of bread, keeping my tone steady. "So, did you have a layover in Las Vegas that day?" He paused briefly, then lifted his brows. "Yeah, the flight from Salt Lake to Dallas connected there. Why?" I studied his face, as if trying to read every flicker of expression I once thought I knew. "Because I found a receipt from a Vegas flower shop in your desk. I thought, maybe you bought flowers for me and forgot?" Daniel smiled, but without sound. It was the kind of smile that comes when the mind is scrambling for an explanation. "Oh, no, that was for a female client over there. She'd just been promoted to CFO, so I sent flowers to congratulate her." I tilted my head. You wrote a card by hand? Yeah. Sometimes personal touches like that make a stronger impression. I raised my brows. With the line, "See you this weekend? Love you?" The air in the room dropped heavy. Daniel set his glass down and drew a deep breath. "Sarah," he began, "you're misunderstanding. I admit, those words don't sound right, but it was just playful banter with a longtime client. Nothing serious." I leaned forward, eyes locked on his. "Then can you show me the meeting schedule with that client?" Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't belong to the innocent. I didn't need to hear more. Dinner ended in tense. Quiet. Daniel excused himself, saying he was tired, and went upstairs early. I stayed at the table, clutching my glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. In my head, every conversation, every small sign I had overlooked replayed itself. The times Daniel turned his back in bed, the vague business trips, the way his eyes dodged mine whenever I came close. I picked up my phone, ran a reverse search on the number from the receipt. No name, just an unlisted line from Nevada. Still, I saved it. A name was beginning to form in my mind, even without proof. I reopened my private folder. What I had so far were scattered clues, a receipt, a phrase, odd behavior. But like threads unraveling from fabric, each small detail tugged at a larger hidden tapestry. I sat in the dark, the only light the warm glow from the kitchen lamp. Not because I wasn't tired, but because I was waiting for another chance, another slip from him that would lead me deeper into the trail he probably didn't even realize he had left behind. The next morning, Daniel left early, wearing his gray suit and carrying the brown leather briefcase he always took on trips. He said he'd be gone 3 days, destination Salt Lake City, with an added detail, a meeting with partners from London. He said it with such confidence, like presenting a polished report. But his goodbye handshake lacked warmth, and his eyes still averted when I smiled and wished him good luck closing the deal. I shut the door once his car disappeared down the street. Then I picked up my phone and dialed. I called Carson and Gold Capital, the firm Daniel always claimed he worked for. I found the number from an old wedding day email where he had thanked the banquet organizers. The call went through to reception, and after a brief hold, a woman's voice answered. "Thank you for calling Carson and Gold. This is Lisa. How may I help you?" I drew a deep breath, keeping my tone calm. "Hello, Lisa. I'd like to confirm employment information. My husband, Daniel Brooks, says he's a financial advisor at your company. But lately I've had some doubts and wanted to verify." There was a pause, then the sound of typing. "Daniel Brooks, you said?" "Yes, Daniel Brooks. He used to say he worked at the Dallas branch, then switched to remote for headquarters." Another pause. Lisa's voice returned, gentler. "I'm sorry, but we've never had anyone named Daniel Brooks employed here, at least not in the last 6 years. Are you sure about the name?" I gripped the phone, heart pounding. "Positive. He still uses a company email and often refers to your firm in calls." Lisa cleared her throat. "Company emails are only issued to employees. But if you'd like, I can pass this to our legal department to check for unauthorized use of our name." I thanked her and hung up. The house was so quiet I could hear the second hand ticking on the wall clock. I stood there, clutching the phone, as if letting go would shatter everything. I sat at the dining table, opened my laptop. A part of me still hoped for a rational explanation, maybe a system error, a name mix-up. But when I searched Daniel's name across job sites, financial certification databases, LinkedIn, even investment news bulletins, the results were the same. Nothing. Not a single trace of Daniel Brooks, financial advisor at Carson and Gold. I pulled up one of his old work emails, a financial plan for a real estate project in Plano. The address was at carsongoldconsulting.com. At the time, it looked professional, but that day, I typed the domain into my browser. No website. I checked domain registration records. It had been purchased less than a year earlier by an anonymous user in Nevada. I leaned back, palms sweating. He had built an entire fake professional identity with a polished-looking email, a convincing cover story so seamless that even I, someone trained to scrutinize details in design, hadn't noticed for nearly a year. I returned to his home office. I didn't dig through drawers. I scanned the room he had set up for working from home. A bookshelf with a few financial novels, a whiteboard scribbled with buzzwords like ROI, merger, capital growth, but nothing showed real work. No legal papers, no contracts, no conference invites. I opened the printer tray and pulled out recent documents. One was a hotel booking in Las Vegas, a suite for extended stays, reserved under Daniel Brooks but billed to DB Management Holdings. I looked up the company name. Nothing, no record in any Texas business registry. I no longer felt anger. What I felt was beyond rage. It was emptiness, like waking from a long dream and realizing the man I married didn't exist. I dialed Miranda, an old classmate now working in civil financial investigations. Sarah, what's going on? I steadied my voice. I need your help looking into someone named Daniel Brooks. I suspect identity fraud or hidden assets. Miranda paused, then said, "Send me everything you've got, addresses, social security number if you have it, company names, anything. I'll see what I can find." I hung up and opened my laptop. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was just sitting in the dark waiting. I was turning on lights one by one in the house Daniel thought would keep me blind. I was retracing the trail he'd left behind. And with each step, it was clear Daniel hadn't just lied about his job. He was living another life, a life I was never invited into. That evening, I didn't turn on the lights when I entered our bedroom. Daniel wasn't home yet, and the house was bathed in dim streetlight filtering through the blinds. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands on my lap, filled with a strange calm. Perhaps when someone reaches their limit, raw emotions dissolve, leaving only the quiet steadiness of reason. I looked at the nightstand. Daniel's phone was there, screen dark, carelessly left, as if he had nothing to hide. But I knew better. Everything he was hiding sat inside that device. I had waited nearly a week for this chance. I'd been watching his passcode habits. He typed quickly, but one morning, from a distance, I caught the 4 digits. It was my mother's birthday. The detail made me shiver with both unease and bitterness. I picked up the phone, entered the 4 numbers. The screen lit up. I skipped the usual apps. I went straight to the photo library, scrolling to hidden albums. In a folder labeled Work Trip NV, I saw what my heart had never been prepared to face. A string of wedding photos. Daniel in a black suit, silver tie. Beside him, a tall, elegant brunette in a simple pleated white gown, holding a bouquet of red roses. They stood before a building with a sign clearly reading, Clark County Courthouse, Las Vegas. What stunned me wasn't the backdrop. It was the ring on Daniel's finger, a plain gold band, completely different from the platinum one I had chosen, engraved with my name inside. I swiped to the next photo. They were kissing in the late afternoon sun, smiles wide, as if this were the only wedding day that had ever mattered to them. I set the phone down on the table, but my palms stayed clenched as if I were trying to hold back the cracks of emotion splintering inside me. Quietly, I lifted my head and stared out the window. Something within me, though bruised and shaken, was shifting into a cold, sharp light. I picked the phone back up and opened the messages. The interface was neat, only a few conversations. But in the hidden section, I saw a name, Claire M. I tapped it. The most recent message was just hours old. Daniel had sent a selfie along with the words, "I'm about to pull the money from the trust. As soon as she signs the authorization like I told you, we're gone forever." Beneath it was Claire's reply. I already checked the stansive. Flights, Costa Rica, still good? Don't let her suspect. I love you. I scrolled slowly upward. The history of texts was the full roadmap of a relationship built on lies, code names for each other, exchanges about how to create distance, apply psychological pressure, make me feel at fault. Their plan was deliberate, calculated. They had known about the trust long before I ever mentioned it. One message from Claire asked, "Does she talk much about her late grandmother?" Daniel had replied, "All the time." That's why I pretended I lost my grandmother too, so we'd have something in common. I could barely breathe reading that. The nights I told him about my childhood, about the old house where I grew up with my grandmother, about how she raised me after my family fell apart, all of it had been fodder for him to craft a counterfeit version of love. A persona designed to make me open my heart. I transferred every image and message to my own phone, encrypted them, stored them in the cloud. There was no more fog, no more wondering. The man I married hadn't simply been unfaithful. He was a systematic con artist, and I had been the target. Everything from the wedding to the lonely nights was part of a calculated script. I turned off the phone and placed it back exactly where it had been. Everything had to look untouched, because from that moment I was no longer just a victim. I was holding the key to the truth, and I would use it to peel back every layer, every person, every organization behind this. By nearly 2 a.m., I still hadn't slept. I sat at my desk, the lamp casting a soft glow over the files I was compiling. Lists of what I'd gathered, bank transaction trails, flight records matching Daniel's absences, a comparison chart linking DB Management Holdings to shell companies in Las Vegas. I opened my laptop and wrote to Miranda. "This is all the data I have. There are wedding photos, texts about seizing the inheritance trust. It can connect me with an attorney. I want to meet as soon as possible. And, Miranda, I think he may have been married to someone else before me." I paused a second, then typed, "I'm ready for any truth, as long as I don't have to live another day in the dark." I hit send, leaned back, and stared into nothing. Outside, dawn hadn't yet broken, but I could feel it. A new day had begun, not for anyone else, but for me. A day of confrontation, of choice, of action. And this time, I would be the one telling the story. The next morning, I went to the office of Rachel Simmons, the attorney Miranda had referred me to. Her office was on the 13th floor of a glass tower in downtown Dallas. The space radiated calm, neatness, and the cold air of a place that had witnessed too many divorces, disputes, and broken contracts. Rachel was in her early 40s, petite, hair tied up, eyes sharp and steady as if nothing could rattle her. She listened as I laid everything out. She didn't interrupt, only took notes, nodding occasionally, asking careful questions about the timeline. "You've collected extremely important evidence," Rachel said after reviewing the wedding photos of Daniel and Claire. "If what we're seeing is genuine, Daniel Brooks hasn't only betrayed you in marriage. He's broken the law. Bigamy is a criminal offense under both Texas and Nevada law." I tightened my hands. "I want this exposed. But more than that, I need the full picture of what he's hidden. I refuse to walk into court with half the truth." Rachel nodded. "I understand. That's why I'll connect you with Jack Miller. He's one of the most reliable private investigators in my network. He's a former homicide detective with extensive experience in marriage fraud and financial crimes. I'll arrange for you to meet him today." By 2 p.m., I was in Jack's modest office on the edge of an old neighborhood where the scent of aged wood and paper hung in the air. Jack sat behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, coffee in hand. He was in his 50s, rugged, salt and pepper hair, eyes that carried years of seeing too much. "I've reviewed the material Miss Simmons sent me," he said after I sat down. "And I have to tell you, this case runs deeper than you think." I listened as he laid it out. After receiving the wedding photos, texts, emails, and Daniel's asset records, Jack had checked Nevada's marriage registry. In less than 2 hours, he found a legal marriage certificate between Daniel Brooks and Claire Mitchell, registered in Clark County on March 14th of last year, nearly a year before Daniel married me. I checked further, Jack continued, flipping through a prepared file. This couple also rented an apartment in Henderson, about a 30-minute drive from Las Vegas. Daniel often used the name Daniel Mitchell there. They have a joint bank account, and 3 months ago, they began transactions tied to a real estate venture in Costa Rica. I stared at surveillance photos, Daniel entering a bank, documents in hand. Claire waiting in the car, dark glasses on, scanning the surroundings. Neither of them looked nervous, as if everything was perfectly routine. And this, Jack slid another photo toward me, was taken last week, the night Daniel claimed he was in Austin for meetings. In the picture, Daniel and Claire were dining in a Vegas restaurant, laughing, holding hands. On his wrist was the very watch I had given him for Christmas. He had worn it on a date with the woman he'd married before me. Legally, Jack said, Daniel has committed bigamy. He married you while still legally bound to another woman. That not only voids your marriage, but also opens him to criminal charges. If we prove financial motives, and I believe we can, the charges will be far more severe. I steadied my voice. And Claire? Would she be considered an accomplice? Jack nodded. If she knew about his second marriage, then yes, she's complicit. And from their text exchanges, I have no doubt she knew. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. Part of me wanted to scream, to collapse under the weight of betrayal, but another part of me was eerily calm, as though I were watching a slow-motion film of someone else's life. Each detail, each piece of evidence pulled me deeper into a labyrinth I never imagined entering. "What do you want to do now?" Jack asked, his voice firm. I looked at him. "I want to protect my assets. I want to stop him from taking a single dollar from my grandmother's trust. And I want the whole truth exposed, not just for me, but for any other women they may have targeted." Jack picked up the phone, dialing contacts. I left his office at dusk, arms full of files, my chest heavy, yet my mind clearer than it had been in months. I knew the legal fight ahead wouldn't be easy, but I no longer felt afraid. Because for the first time since signing that marriage license, I had taken control. And I wasn't about to let imposters of love steal anything more from my life. 2 days later, at 8 a.m., Jack called. His voice was steady, but heavier this time, as if he were bracing himself to say something he wished he didn't have to. "I need to see you in person. This morning." Less than an hour later, I was back in his office. Jack wasn't at his desk. He stood near the window, arms crossed, watching the traffic inch through the busy intersection below. When I entered, he turned, set a file on the desk, and looked at me directly, unflinching. "Claire isn't just Daniel's wife. She's his half-sister." I froze. His words reached beyond betrayal, into something twisted, grotesque, beyond morality. I stared at Jack, half expecting him to say I was wrong. But he didn't. He slid the file toward me. "We traced Claire Mitchell's birth records. Her full name is Claire Renee Brooks. Born in Bakersfield, California. Father, Edward Brooks, Daniel's biological father." I flipped through the documents: birth certificate, school transfers, hospital records, old tax files. Everything lined up. There was no doubt. After the father died, Claire's mother moved to Nevada. Daniel stayed in California with his own mother. They didn't live together, but they stayed in contact at least since 2012. 3 years later, they began opening bank accounts together under different names. Jack sat across from me. "Sarah, these two have a history of working together across at least 3 states, California, Florida, and now Texas. In each place, they targeted women with independent wealth or inheritances." Daniel approached, built relationships, married, and slowly gained financial control. Claire stayed behind the scenes, playing wife, lover, or business partner. When suspicion arose, they disappeared. I dropped my head into my hands, not from shock, but from the bitter sting of remembering every tender gesture Daniel had once given me. Candlelit dinners, midnight conversations, promises of love without condition, all of it was a tool, a chain of rehearsed acts. And the woman I thought was my rival in Nevada, the bride in those photos, was actually his blood. I thought he was just a lonely man looking for love, I whispered. In truth, he's a predator. And I was just another chosen target. Jack stayed quiet, then opened another file. There's one more thing. I reviewed your prenuptial agreement. I lifted my head. He said it was protection for both of us. On the surface, yes. But there's a special clause on page 6, Appendix B. If you initiate divorce within the first 12 months, you forfeit ownership of any asset classified as non-contributory by the partner, including your separate inheritance trust. But if Daniel files, or if the marriage passes the 1-year mark, that clause becomes void. I froze, and I signed it 3 weeks before the wedding. Without reading it carefully, because at the time he said the attorney had already gone through everything. Exactly. He created time pressure, preyed on your emotions. More than that, he understood your psychology. You were in love, so you didn't question it. That's how people like him operate. Affection is the mask. The law is the trap. I leaned back in the chair, closed my eyes. I saw myself sitting in the bedroom, opening the email with the prenup, while Daniel stood behind me with a glass of wine, his arm around my shoulders, whispering, "It's just a formality." To put my parents at ease. Is there a way to invalidate it? I asked, my voice thin. Jack nodded. If we can prove the agreement was signed under deception or lack of transparency, and especially if we establish financial fraud as the motive, it can be completely thrown out. I nodded slowly. I will not lose the trust. My grandmother left it as her final wish. Not for me to buy a big house, but so I could live free, independent. I will not let it fall into Daniel's hands. Jack gave a faint smile. You're far more prepared than most people I've worked with. I didn't smile back. There was no faith left strong enough to rise into laughter. But something had hardened in my chest, a kind of armor forming around my heart. Not to guard against love, but against anyone pretending to love. I want to begin, I said. Jack nodded, then reached for his phone. I'll set it up. We'll make sure he never sees it coming. By Monday morning, I walked into Rachel's office in a simple outfit, my face steadier than it had been in 2 months. She rose to greet me, her eyes still sharp, but carrying something softer, less the concern of an attorney for her client, more the recognition of a woman who had witnessed too much betrayal in marriage and now saw someone who refused to stay broken. Rachel opened the draft of the divorce petition. She had written it exactly as we planned, calm, reasonable, persuasive, with no hint of anger or suspicion. In it, I accepted partial blame, citing loss of emotional connection, and expressed my wish to end things amicably without financial disputes. I read every line, every period, then nodded. Perfect. He'll believe it. Rachel gave me a serious look. Are you sure you're ready, Sarah? Once we file, Daniel will move to transfer money quickly. If we want to catch him, every step has to be timed down to the hour. I'm ready, I said firmly. Rachel nodded, then pressed the intercom. Send in Agent Hayes. The man who entered minutes later was an FBI agent assigned to the case. He was in his 40s, tall, with neatly trimmed gray hair and the wary look of someone seasoned in investigations. He set a sealed folder on the table in front of me. We've worked with the bank. A new account has been created in your name, designed to mirror your grandmother's trust, same balance, same transaction history. When Daniel accesses it, every move will be recorded and encrypted. We've also installed internal alerts. The moment he tries to withdraw funds, the signal comes straight to us. I held the folder, my hand trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from sensing how close I was to the truth. One step more, and I would see the face behind years of lies. "What's next?" I asked. "You'll file for divorce tomorrow morning, then send Daniel a copy in the evening, along with a handwritten letter," Rachel said. "Write something sad, a little regretful. Remind him of good times. He needs to believe you're heartbroken but resigned." I nodded. That night, under the quiet glow of my desk lamp, I sat down and wrote, not as a betrayed wife, but as a woman who once believed she had loved a real husband. "Daniel, I've thought long and hard before writing this. We once had beautiful moments, though they didn't last as I wished. I no longer feel I belong in our life together. Maybe it's me. Maybe I expected too much. You used to tell me I should live independently, freely. Perhaps this is the time to do that. I will file for divorce tomorrow. I don't blame you. I only hope that when this is over, you'll remember me as someone who truly loved you." I slipped the letter into an envelope, left it unsealed. Beside it was the copy of the petition Rachel had prepared. I placed them neatly on Daniel's desk while he was away, right next to his morning coffee mug. Then I walked out. No tears, no turning back. 3 days later, Jack called me. His voice was rough with emotion. He accessed the account. I held my breath. At 10:30 this morning, he checked the balance, downloaded the history. Last night, he called Claire. We tracked it with the locator we installed on his phone. On the call, he said, word for word, she signed, "We're about to have everything. I'll move the money to the safe account by the weekend." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. In my mind, I heard Daniel's deep voice from our wedding day as he held my hand. "I didn't marry you for money. I married you because I couldn't imagine life without you." Now I understood. He could imagine life without me. He just couldn't imagine life without my money, Jack went on. "We've sent everything to the federal prosecutor. One step remains. Let him actually attempt the transfer. After that, we move in," I whispered. "And me? What do I do now?" "You go home. Act normal. Make him believe you've truly let go. You're still Sarah, gentle, wounded, weary, ready to part ways. He needs to see himself winning." I pressed my lips together. "Fine. I'll play the part." That night, I returned to the house I once called home. Daniel sat at his desk, typing, his face disturbingly calm. When I entered, he looked up, hesitated. "Sarah, I got the papers." "And your letter." I stood still, then nodded. "I don't want to fight. I'm tired." Daniel left his chair, came over, and took my hand, suddenly playing the role of a caring husband again. I let him hold it. I even let him give me that look of pity. I didn't need to expose him, didn't need to shout, because I knew the more convinced he was of victory, the faster he'd fall into the trap. And when the final cell door shut, he'd never understand how the wife he thought naive and fragile had laid every brick on the path to his downfall. That morning was overcast, a thin fog covering rooftops across downtown Dallas. I sat in my car a block from First Union Bank, gripping the steering wheel until my hands went numb. Agent Hayes was in the car beside me, relaying signals through comms. In the back seat sat Jack, headphones on, eyes locked on a small monitor. Claire just pulled into the garage. "Plates match," Jack said low. I turned toward the glass windows, heart pounding. Daniel had left the house at 8, wearing a gray shirt and a deep red polka dot tie, the outfit he always chose when he wanted to impress. He kissed my cheek before leaving, still in character as the devoted husband. "Don't worry, Sarah," he'd said at the door. "I'll be home early tonight. We should talk more." I hadn't answered. I just stood in the doorway, watching him vanish down the street, feeling lighter, as though a boulder had been lifted from my chest. I wasn't trembling anymore. I wasn't furious either. I was waiting calm, steady, ready. Around 8:45, a silver BMW pulled up to the bank. Daniel stepped out, carrying his familiar leather briefcase. No hesitation, no caution. Across the lot, Claire sat in her car, dark glasses covering her eyes, her hand resting on the wheel. He's heading inside. All teams ready, Hayes ordered, eyes sharp. I couldn't see clearly inside, but through the monitor, I watched Daniel enter the private banking suite on the third floor, the space reserved for high-value clients. 10 minutes later, an undercover agent's voice came through. He presented the authorization. He's requesting a full transfer to an international account. Swift code being entered. Jack glanced at Hayes. Trigger the arrest. Seconds later, agents stormed the room, badges flashing. Daniel jolted, sprang from his seat. What's going on? Who are you people? Daniel Brooks, you are under arrest for suspected financial fraud, bigamy, interstate money laundering, and identity theft. I saw his face on the monitor, drained, eyes darting. Then he bolted for the side exit. An agent intercepted him, slammed him to the ground, cuffed him as he thrashed. Claire was arrested moments later in the car. She broke into tears, pretending panic. I didn't know. He told me I was just helping with paperwork. He said he was single. But her performance fell apart when Agent Hayes presented evidence right there. We have your recorded conversations with Daniel Brooks, spanning 6 months, including discussions of the trust scheme, false companies, and plans to flee the country. He pulled out a recorder, pressed play. She thinks you still love her. Just get the visa ready. I'll handle the trust. 1 more week, Claire. It'll all be ours. Claire froze, her lips pressed tight. The fake tears vanished, leaving only a cold, vacant stare. Daniel buried his face into his arms, shouting, "No, she set me up. She forced me to sign the divorce. She framed me." I heard his voice crackle through the earpiece, and a slow, simmering anger rose inside me. But I didn't take my eyes off the screen. I wanted to witness the very last second, the moment his mask shattered completely. The agents led both of them out of the building, past dozens of watchful eyes from bank employees, customers, and bystanders. Daniel's confidence was gone, his suit wrinkled, his tie crooked, his wrists cuffed tight. Claire stayed silent, lips pressed, turning her face away, trying to dodge the cameras of reporters who had been tipped off. Jack turned to me and said quietly, "You did it." I looked at him and exhaled softly, not out of relief, but because I knew that justice, late as it was, had finally cut through the fog. An hour later, inside the FBI's security room, I was allowed to see them through a one-way mirror. Daniel sat motionless in his chair, hands on the table, his eyes vacant. Claire was further in the corner, facing the wall, refusing to speak. "They'll both be prosecuted on multiple federal charges," Hayes explained. "We're expanding the investigation, searching for other victims in California and Florida. More charges are likely." I nodded. I didn't need to hear more. What mattered to me was that they could no longer hurt anyone else. I stepped out of headquarters just as the sun began to rise higher. The first light of day hit the sidewalks, still damp with dew, scattering fragile but undeniable rays across the ground. I stood there for a while, breathing deeply, letting myself feel the air I hadn't dared to call freedom for so long. Then I walked forward without looking back. Because in the end, I hadn't just escaped a false marriage, I had stepped out of a stage play where they thought I would forever stay hidden in the wings. The trial took place on a crisp early autumn morning, under a pale Texas sky without wind. I sat in the front row of the courtroom, surrounded by strangers, some reporters, some other victims of Daniel and Claire. Beside me was Rachel, my attorney, her hand resting gently on mine, a wordless gesture of reassurance. Daniel entered in an orange prison jumpsuit, wrists shackled, his arrogant stare nowhere to be found. He looked thinner, his cheeks hollow, his hair longer, messy, and dull. I studied him for a long moment, not to search for something familiar, but to remind myself I had let him go forever. Claire sat behind, her eyes unfocused, as though even now she couldn't believe everything had collapsed. The prosecutor laid out evidence for more than 3 hours. Recordings, Photos, bank records, forged contracts, lists of victims, everything displayed as clear as glass. And it wasn't just me. They had targeted at least 5 other women in California, Florida, and Colorado. Each case documented, each victim financially devastated, each carrying wounds that couldn't be measured. When it was over, the judge read the sentences with firm clarity. Defendant Daniel Brooks is sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for financial fraud, bigamy, identity theft, and interstate money laundering. Defendant Claire Renee Brooks is sentenced to 10 years for conspiracy and participation in a cross-state fraud scheme. No one objected, no applause followed, just silence, heavy and collective, as if the entire room was finally exhaling after holding its breath too long. When the judge invited victims to speak, I rose and walked to the witness stand. The golden lights above cast a solemn glow on the chamber. I stood straight, my voice steady and clear. My name is Sarah Brooks, or perhaps more accurately, I was once Sarah Brooks. Today, I don't stand here to retell the pain Daniel caused me. I stand here to say that I'm no longer afraid. I paused, looking briefly at Daniel, then back to the judge. I once trusted a man who built an entire false life to reach me. He used the most sacred things, love, marriage, and trust, as tools to take away the one thing my grandmother left me, my independence. But in losing that false love, I found truth. I found my strength. My voice didn't tremble, it didn't break. It rang calmly, like words I had rehearsed silently for months, waiting for the moment to release them. I don't hate them, I concluded, but I will never forget. And I hope that what happened here today helps other women out there. Understand, when something feels wrong, don't stay silent. Seek the truth. Because sometimes the deepest wound doesn't come from betrayal itself, but from the way we keep justifying it. The courtroom stayed still. I returned to my seat, feeling lighter than I had imagined possible. When Daniel and Claire were transferred to prison, reporters pressed in, hoping for a statement. I didn't stop. I simply smiled faintly and walked past the courthouse gates like someone who had just cleared away the last debris of a ruined house. Weeks later, more women reached out to Rachel. They admitted they had long suspected their husbands, boyfriends, or business partners, but never had proof. After the case made headlines, they recognized Daniel and Claire from their past. Details they had once dismissed: an email address, a familiar phrase, unusual financial behavior, all began to make sense. A broader network of fraud was uncovered, layered, and intricate. The predators hiding under the guise of love were finally called what they were: criminals. I never went back to the old house. I sold it, cleared everything out, and put part of the money into a community fund, supporting women deceived by marriage fraud. I moved to a quiet place near White Rock Lake, where the mornings were gentle, and the water rippled softly in the evenings. I began journaling again, not to dwell on sorrow, but to preserve clarity. I sat on a wooden chair by the shore, the still surface of the lake before me, sometimes mirroring drifting clouds. My hand turned the pages, my pen captured each line, each memory, each scar now healed. I am no longer the deceived woman, no longer the abandoned wife. I am Sarah, someone who walked through darkness and chose light. And I kept writing, not Daniel's story, but mine. And the story of every person who has been hurt but still found the courage to rise, to walk forward, and to begin again. I believe everyone listening now carries their own feelings. Perhaps anger, perhaps sorrow, perhaps quiet empathy. But above all, I hope you've seen the most important truth. None of us were born to remain victims forever. If you've ever been wounded in marriage, in trust, or in love, I hope you won't blame yourself. Sometimes pain doesn't come from being naive. It comes from being too genuine with someone unworthy. And what about you? What do you think of this story? About the choices I had to make? If you've ever felt lost inside your own relationship, did you ever consider standing up, facing forward, and choosing a new path for yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I will read every word, and I believe not just me, but other women too will find strength in your voices. And if you want more true stories, more lessons about family, love, and the choices that shape us, don't forget to follow this channel. There are many more stories waiting to be told, not just to listen to, but to understand, to reflect, and to carry something meaningful into your own life. Thank you for listening to my story. We will meet again in the next ones about life, about trust, and about the way we all learn to move forward stronger than before.